Good evening and welcome to Q&A to answer your questions tonight. The Minister for Defence Materiel, Jason Clare. News Limited columnist, Miranda Devine. Kevin Rudd's former Press Secretary, Lachlan Harris. The Deputy Leader of the Greens, Senator Christine Milne. And the Shadow Education Minister, Christopher Pyne. Please welcome our panel. Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Daylight Savings Time, and it's simulcast on ABC News 24, Australia Network and News Radio. And you can go to our website to send your questions and join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that's just appearing on your screen right now. We'll come to Australian politics shortly, but over the weekend events have been moving quickly in the Middle East. And our first question tonight comes from Paula Giardino.
Thank you, Tony. The United Nations' belated intervention in Libya allowed Gaddafi to continue his brutal attacks on innocent civilians. Now that the no-fly zone is in place, lives may be saved. But are the Western nations capable of taking on this enormous responsibility in Libya?
Jason Clare, let's start with you.
It is an enormous responsibility and it was belated. Giardino, you're right. It took too long to act. But the fact that the United Nations has moved this resolution means that there are people that are still alive today in Benghazi that would have been slaughtered by Gaddafi if that resolution hadn't been passed. This is a person who has said that he would ensure there was no mercy for his citizens, and his son said there'd be rivers of blood. So whilst we're not sure what will happen next, we can't be certain of that. What we can be certain of is if we hadn't taken the action that's been taken, then Benghazi, a city that has double the population of Canberra, would have been attacked by Gaddafi and a lot of people would have been killed. So belated, but I think the UN is starting to learn some of those lessons from Rwanda, from Darfur, and from other situations where the UN, frankly, has just been too slow to act.
Getting to the question, are Western nations capable of taking on this enormous responsibility? This is effectively the first test case of the UN doctrine of responsibility, isn't it?
It is, and responsibility to act, if there is ever a reason to do that, it's when the leader of a country has got his tanks and his forces, his planes, armed to the teeth, ready to attack his own people, threatening rivers of blood. Now, when you have a situation like that, I think there's a responsibility on the countries of the world to take action to try and stop that. And there are people that are still alive today in Benghazi because of the action that's been taken.
Christine Milne, let's hear from you on this.
Yes, look, I agree, and I think we've all been inspired over the last short while about the courage and bravery, particularly of young people right throughout the Middle East, as they pursue their dream of democracy. And it was so heartening to see eventually the UN get its act together and to now see the response of those holding out in Benghazi and to see that finally the international community has come to their assistance for the protection of civilians. So I think this is really important because you cannot leave 1 million people to the butchery that would have occurred had Gaddafi been allowed to go in there in the way that he intended.
Just briefly, Christine Milne, heartening for the Greens to see a US-led military intervention?
Well, this is a United Nations intervention. I think that's a really important point here. And the Greens called for the no-fly zone quite early in the piece. We wanted to see the United Nations get involved in this because we want to see civilians protected, and we want to continue to give support to those in the Middle East who are hoping for, finally, democracy. And tonight on the news there was a young woman in Egypt just so excited about being able to vote, being actually able to engage in the democratic process, something we take for granted. So, yes, I think it's great to see the UN finally getting a resolution to go in and protect civilians.
Christopher Pyne.
Well, I'll just say a couple of things. Firstly, I think credit where credit's due. Kevin Rudd was well ahead of the curve with respect to the no-fly zone in Libya and has really led from the front in terms of an international effort to close down the Gaddafi regime, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for showing real leadership when it comes to protecting the rights of human beings in Libya. I think it's interesting listening to Christine Milne. I don't want to be partisan about it, but I'd be fascinated to know the difference between the intervention in Afghanistan, the intervention in Iraq, and why there's this extraordinary support for the intervention in Libya. Now, I supported all three.
Mass destruction. Try that for a start.
Well, I supported all three interventions, but I'm surprised that the Greens have moved to that level. Perhaps not quite as extreme as the Prime Minister said last week.
Well, let's go to the weapons of mass destruction, Christopher. The whole Iraq intervention was based on a lie.
Well, the Saddam Hussein regime was butchering its people. Saddam Hussein was butchering his people not just for a month, but for about 20 years, and putting them through the human shredder and so on, I would have thought would have qualified for needing to intervene to protect people's human rights.
Right, let's hear from Lachlan Harris. The same question.
I know that the question was, how can we be certain? I think the answer is we can't be, and we're not. But does that mean we don't do it? I don't think so. I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of the lesser of two evils, really. We are going down a very uncertain course. In Afghanistan and Iraq, the worst-case scenarios were realised, and that's a real possibility here. But does that mean we shouldn't have done it? I don't think so. I think in the end, presented with the facts that Jason and everyone's outlined, we had no choice but to act.
You heard what Christopher Pyne was saying about Kevin Rudd's leadership on this issue. Were you surprised to see...
Whenever Christopher Pyne starts complimenting a Labor minister, I get very nervous.
Credits to you, look.
So the question is, were you surprised to see Kevin Rudd out in front of the Prime Minister on this issue?
Well, I don't accept the analysis of out in front. I wasn't surprised to see Kevin Rudd working very, very tirelessly hard on this issue. That's exactly the sort of Foreign Minister he was always going to be. There was no doubt about that. I think the Liberal Party...
You mean he was always going to be when he was Prime Minister?
He was always going to be Kevin Rudd. I mean, if Kevin Rudd was a butcher, he'd be making sausages 18 hours a day, you know? Like, as a Foreign Minister, he'll be pursuing foreign policy 18 hours a day. That's the sort of man he is. But I think, basically, I think the Liberal Party's attempts to portray this as kind of a sign of leadership instability are a little bit misleading. I would suggest the Liberal Party's view of foreign policy is very conservative. And you know, Julie Bishop, if you put the words human rights and China in a sentence together, then Julie Bishop thinks you're being outrageous and sort of going too far. And the fact is, Labor doesn't have that view, and Kevin Rudd doesn't have that view, and he's going to be out there arguing hard for these things. And I think that's a great thing. It's not a sign of a weak government, it's a sign of a strong government. It's what I think the Australian government should be doing.
Let's hear from Miranda Devine on this issue.
Well, I think the uncertainties ahead are partly driven by the fact that the American President, Obama, has said that under no circumstances will we have boots on the ground, and that's perfectly understandable, but that's just given Gaddafi this sort of green light. He just has to hunker down for a little while, you know, a few airstrikes, and then what happens if he comes out in a couple of weeks' time, starts massacring people again? You know, at some point, I think we're going to have to go further, and you know, what's Australia's position then? You know, do we send our soldiers there to risk their lives again in another battlefield, foreign battlefield?
There hasn't been universal support among Conservative commentators for this issue. I'll cite Piers Ackerman and Greg Sheridan, who was also asking, what's the end game, what's the exit strategy? Are you serious that you think you could actually put foreign troops, Western troops, on the ground in Libya?
Well, that's the question. I mean, a no-fly zone is not going to be enough. You know, the Srebrenica massacre happened when there was a no-fly zone happening. You know, it's not a catch-all protector. And at some point, you know, you have to go in and you have to help the rebels. You have to arm them, train them, whatever. You know, Gaddafi is not just going to throw his hands up because there's a no-fly zone, obviously.
So is that, just so I get this right, do you think that's the fundamental objection, that this hasn't gone far enough?
I'm not saying it hasn't gone far enough. I'm just saying, of course, we had to do something, but we're in a devil's own position because a no-fly zone is not the end. You know, it sounds very neat and clean, but we've seen in the past that it never is, that you have to actually go and put some skin in the game.
Let's just hear from the Minister on that subject before I move on to the next question.
I don't think anyone has said that this would be a panacea. The object is to protect people that would be killed, to stop the killing. And if we hadn't taken the action, if the world hadn't taken the action that it has, then the killing would continue.
Could you imagine it evolving into a ground war involving Western troops? That's the point.
Well, there's a ground war happening right now. The object of the no-fly zone is to stop Gaddafi from using planes to bomb and kill his own people.
No, but I mean, does this government, which has advocated a no-fly zone, would it go as far as to advocate Western troops, boots on the ground?
No. We've been very clear that we don't support mission creep. We don't support putting boots on the ground. The UN's been very clear about that too. The resolution is pretty far-reaching, though. It gives powers to the coalition forces to take whatever action is necessary to protect people that are under the threat of being attacked. So that's just not making sure that Gaddafi's planes don't take off and bomb their own people, but it's stopping tanks that are on the edge of Benghazi from bombing people in their own homes.
And there's a fair chance that the boots on the ground from the United Nations won't be necessary. I mean, a lot of the people who are fighting for Gaddafi are mercenaries from other places in Africa. And now that the United States, France, Great Britain, the Arab League, Arab countries are involved in attacking Gaddafi's regime, a lot of those mercenaries will peel away. And before the Gaddafi regime was able to bring tanks and armoured vehicles and fighter jets to bear against the rebels were actually getting very close to Tripoli. So you'd hope now, with support from the air and the defeat of Gaddafi's air force, that the rebels will now get the upper hand. That would be the hope.
All right, let's go to our next question. It's on this subject as well. It comes from Jessica Zhao.
Look, how can we justify direct military intervention in Libya when we have so little substantial knowledge regarding both the opaque internal politics and what ideals the minority rebel uprising represents?
Let's go to Miranda on that, because you were contemplating taking this further. Is it clear what the rebel forces represent?
Not really. I mean, they put together a council, and there's a couple of people from Gaddafi's ministry who've escaped. But look, I think that's a really valid question, because you know, you've seen in Egypt in the elections the Muslim Brotherhood have become stronger. We really don't know in a lot of these places, you know, what kind of sort of shadowy forces, how much Iran is involved in manipulating the situation.
Well, what we do know is 8,000 people have been killed. What we do know is 300,000 people have fled Libya to escape somebody who said that there'd be rivers of blood if you don't do what I say. When you make a decision to protect people, you make it not on what people's ideology might be. You do it on protecting human life. That's what the doctrine of responsibility to protect is all about. Now, if you've got a city like Benghazi with almost 1 million people, and a bloke saying he's going to blow it to smithereens, I think it's the right thing to do to stop that happening.
Christine Milne.
Well, I agree, and I think that's exactly what we do know, is that Gaddafi had said that there would be no compassion, no mercy, he would chase people down to their closets, and that would have meant a massacre. And the global community has got a responsibility. And as we said before, we've stood back and watched in Rwanda. We saw what happened in Darfur. It is time that we did get our act together and respond by protecting civilians.
We didn't respond in Darfur, though.
No, we didn't, and we should have.
I mean, I think Jessica's actually asked the key question.